few weeks ago, I did something I promised myself I would never do. After years of resisting, I finally broke down and made a Twitter account. It's been nice, for the most part. I really enjoy getting to follow other creators I like, see cool art, post all the random thoughts I used to just speak aloud to the Taleoids. It's also nice to finally be able to keep up with the news. In theory. I knew the world outside the Foundry was a fraught place, but I wasn't prepared to see quite so much of it so fast. There are so many horrifying things happening in the world right now, I'm sure you don't need me to be specific. Just point in a direction. There's something bad happening there. It's good to stay informed on what's going on, but when your entire feed, every time you come online, is just nightmare after nightmare, you really start to feel kind of powerless. Like the entire world is just on fire, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. I always thought of the doom scroll as this sort of funny meme. I didn't realize it was this universal hope-destroying phenomenon. Escapism is not usually the reason I read fiction, but after spending a little time in the real world, I could really use a little of that right now. Maybe something of a slightly softer persuasion than what I'm used to. A rare piece of cozy fiction. Sometimes the real world is just too much. Maybe your workload is stressing you out, or you're fighting with someone you care about, or you're just overwhelmed. In times like these, who could possibly blame you for using fiction just to escape? You're not always going to be in the right headspace for an emotional or intellectual challenge. Sometimes you want stories that will alleviate your anxieties rather than compound them. Good thing there's an entire genre for that. It's called cozy fiction, and it is literally made to purpose for this. Cozy fiction is, admittedly, a pretty subjective label. People definitely get different mileage out of that term. Generally, it describes cozy in the most hyperbolic sense. Good-hearted characters in idyllic settings that just get to exist. It could be that they live on a farm in a small town where everyone pretty much gets along. Or maybe they befriend a giant raccoon that lives in a tree. Maybe they just ride around from village to village serving tea to people who don't know what pollution is. It sounds awesome, right? Much better than what we have to put up with here in our reality, at least. I've noticed that this genre is especially popular in games recently. That makes sense to me. Games are probably the most immersive form of media. They're sort of the closest you can actually come to living in these worlds rather than just observing them. Unsurprisingly, cozy games are experiencing a bit of a boom right now and have been for the last few years. I think we can thank Animal Crossing New Horizons for that. It had impeccable timing, happening to come out just as the 2020 COVID pandemic began. Almost suspiciously good timing. Anyway, what happens when everyone's stuck in their house for months on end due to unprecedented apocalyptic conditions? They play video games. For many people, games specifically lacking in apocalypses. And what happens when a specific kind of game sells really, really, really well? Everyone jumps on the trend. That's not to say, of course, that cozy games are new. The Animal Crossing franchise itself was already about 20 years old by the time New Horizons came out. Stardew Valley was a smash hit back in 2016, building on the legacy of the Harvest Moon franchise. This stuff has been around for a while, but its relative popularity is still pretty new. We're a few years into the boom now, and the market is, shall we say, robust. It seems we're dealing with a quantity over quality situation here. A lot of these cute, cozy games aren't really very good. Sort of shovelware stuff. Quick, dirty money grabs. A lot of them are actually really boring. There's a tendency for these games to have very little tension, which makes sense, I guess. I mean, how can the game be relaxing if there's something at risk? But for most people, I suspect it might just not be enough to wander around watering virtual plants all day. I suppose there are much simpler versions of this, puzzle games that can be relatively plain and repetitive mechanics-wise, but even those have the inherent tension of, can I solve this puzzle or not? If there's no conflict in these games to keep them interesting, the player probably won't want to keep playing. That conflict doesn't have to be huge. It could be as simple as catching more fish than your opponent, or bringing a character a certain number of collectibles to earn a reward from them. For instance, I lost interest in Animal Crossing after a few weeks because I'm not particularly motivated by fulfilling achievements just for the sake of it. But a game like Palia, which is mechanically very similar to Animal Crossing, has had me hooked for months because there's a whole RPG plotline to quest through in between cooking and befriending your neighbors. What will and will not hold your attention varies from person to person, and plenty of people do enjoy games that aren't super dynamic. Still, even those games might feature a change of scenery every once in a while. I think it's safe to assume that most people at least want something to happen in their games, even if that something is relatively minor. In fact, I noticed that a ton of quote-unquote cozy games are actually majorly eventful. I mentioned earlier that the cozy label is subjective. I've seen it applied to games as diverse as Fallout 4 and Project Zomboid, two games that are certainly not marketed as relaxing. I do get what those people mean, though. There are definitely cozy elements to them, like building a base in Fallout 4 does feel emotionally similar to building a house in Animal Crossing. Project Zomboid is a rigorous zombie apocalypse survival horror game, but half the fun of it for me was just meal prepping. It was satisfying to ignore the ongoing apocalypse for a while, knowing that the meal I took the time to put together might save my life down the road. From the time I've spent playing these games, I would actually say that I find them most rewarding when they're not just cozy. Dressing up your character and going on goofy side quests is somehow a lot more fulfilling when you know that somewhere in the world, the end boss is still waiting for you. The fishing and cooking minigames are more than just a random additional mechanic. They're space to catch your breath between all the action, build up your strength for the next leg of your adventure. It reminds me of that scene in the movie Spirited Away. You know the one? On the train? A lot happens in that movie, but this is the moment I always come back to. It reminds me of a scene toward the end of the movie, right after a high-energy sequence where No-Face, monstrously engorged on decadent food, goes on a rampage through the bathhouse. The train scene is tonal whiplash, the complete opposite of what came before it. There's no dialogue, just a beautifully somber piano melody over an animated stillness that only Miyazaki could capture. This scene is only a minute and a half long. Nothing really happens in it. It is, by far, my favorite part of the movie. Roger Ebert once asked Miyazaki about the scene. He explained that his movies frequently feature scenes like this, specifically designed to provide that moment to breathe. We have a word for that in Japanese, he said. It's called ma, emptiness. It's there intentionally. Miyazaki clapped his hands a few times and then said, "The time in between my clapping is ma. If you just have non-stop action with no breathing space at all, it's just busyness." If you've watched any of Miyazaki's movies, you know exactly what he's talking about. They're full of moments like this. And despite the fact that the films are brimming over with fantasy and adventure, they're also the moments that tend to stick with you. They're just that powerful. If you really love moments like this, you'll be pleased to know that there's an entire literary magazine for them. In Tales and Feathers, all the stories are just these breaks, moments between actions. In their submission guidelines, the magazine says that they're looking for stories that take place before or between or after the epic conflicts. They also specify that they only publish stories that offer warmth, comfort, and possibility. These stories do describe moments of comfort, but they also don't deny the conflicts which lie to either side of them, which feels a little more realistic to me. It helps me to enjoy the kind of escapism they offer. Because without the conflict, why would anyone need to be comforted? My personal favorite story in the magazine is in their very first issue, which is free to read on their website. It's called The Day the Curse Was Broken by Tobias Bernstein. It follows an elderly woman named Letty who spent years living a cursed life in a cursed land. Until, one day, the curse just breaks. Somewhere, someone has finally managed to save the world. The landscape shakes off its blight right before Letty's eyes. As crumbled houses knit themselves back together and the injured begin to heal and impassable roads are once again cleared, Letty's priorities come back into focus. After her long adventure, all she really cares about is getting back home to her long-missed lover, Greta. I won't spoil the rest of the story for you, but I think it illustrates my point from earlier really well. I suppose you can write a story without high stakes or without low stakes, but I think they complement each other really well. In The Day the Curse Was Broken, the stakes are pretty low. It is essentially just a story about an old woman walking down the street. The big, high-stakes boss battle that broke the curse happened entirely off-screen, and we never learned about what exactly went down. Yet, the story still has this deep, emotional core in wondering if Greta is still alive after all these years. The love between Letty and Greta certainly isn't high stakes in the same way that breaking a curse is, but that love is why the curse should be broken in the first place. Why save the world if there's nothing worth saving? Letty's journey home occupies a place in my mind near to the train scene from Spirited Away. They're both moments of relative calm immediately following a stressful situation. Both of these scenes provide our protagonists an opening to recover from what just happened and refocus on what they need to do next. Meeting Zeniba, finding Greta. If Letty and Chihiro didn't have these breaks, if they were forced to rush from one action scene to another, it would be hard to believe. How could they have the capacity to deal with all of that back to back? Sometimes you just need a second to chill and get yourself together. I mentioned cozy games earlier and how the purpose of playing these games is, for many people, to relax and take a break from work. What I find really interesting about this is that so many of these games are about working. Maybe you run a dog shelter or a coffee shop or a bookstore. You might spend hours pretending to cook or build furniture or pressure wash a house. These are things that, in real life, probably wouldn't be very relaxing or fun, but because they're designed to be satisfying and accomplishable, they don't feel like chores. The key here is that the game gives you a specific goal or problem to solve, and then you just do. You just get to solve it. Real life is rarely that tidy. Of course, all video games are pretty much built that way. Something like Doom, where your goal might be to brutally massacre as many demons as you possibly can, isn't necessarily cozy, but it can be relaxing. I'm sure there are plenty of people who come home from the office and blow off steam by punching the heads off demons for a few hours. Is that really worse than coming home and pretending to run a farm? Unlike life, these goals are both designed to be accomplishable. You won't have anything thrown at you that you aren't equipped to handle, and even if you are, you can just put the game down and come back later. The stakes may be high and it may take a couple of tries, but the only thing that could really prevent the world from being saved here would be giving up. With games, if you see that the entire world is on fire, you can usually put it out. For the entirety of The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild, Zelda is trapped in her own castle. She's been locked in battle with Calamity Ganon for 100 years, barely able to hold off another apocalypse. Meanwhile, the legendary hero Link is running around collecting 900 Korok seeds so that he can earn a piece of golden poop. I'm not kidding. There are towns to build and recipes to cook and horses to tame. Yes, you will eventually have to face the divine beasts and take care of some shrines if you want the game to go anywhere. In the meantime, there's really nothing stopping you from just hanging out. In a game, you can justify this. The world will wait indefinitely to end. The burden of guilt you spend relaxing in Breath of the Wild is not the same as the one you might bear in real life. Because in real life, fires don't just wait to burn. The world is on fire. And if someone isn't active about putting it out, it will get worse. There are causes to rally for and people to help. We do very much live in a world that needs saving. But you aren't Link. The weight of saving the whole world is not squarely on your shoulders. The world does need your effort, yes, but it also needs you to have the energy to spend. If all you do all day is doom scroll to be up to date on every piece of news, you just end up paralyzed with misery. If you volunteer to the exclusion of supporting yourself, you end up another person who needs volunteer help. The world is on fire, but not all of it. These spaces between the burning, where you have the luxury to look after yourself, to find the time to relax, these two are what Miyazaki was describing. These are the quiet between the claps. The world needs you to use them. It needs you to have these low-stakes moments so that you can be one of the millions of tiny heroes that will save it. If that means pretending to be a farmer for 2 hours on a weeknight, or playing fishing minigames, or punching the heads off of hordes of demons, I hope you will. Earlier, when I said that people play video games to unwind after a stressful day, I was speaking from experience. I may not go to work or school or, the grocery store like humans do, but I do have stressors of my own. In fact, it's because I don't go to school that I'm getting so much out of my new pastime of choice, which also just so happens to be the sponsor of this video, Brilliant.org. I never thought I would be someone who does math to unwind. I'm a literature robot. I read books to relax, not calculate things. But then I started using Brilliant, and now I'm treating their data science courses the way that many of you treat Animal Crossing. That's because Brilliant's courses are specifically designed to be the most effective way to learn. It doesn't feel like homework, it feels like a video game. Brilliant's courses are made up of hands-on lessons. No lectures, no homework. It really feels like more than just memorizing facts, the way I'm told you so often have to do in school. I can tell I'm actually picking up new concepts and building critical thinking skills. And I can take Brilliant on the go, too, in case I want to use it on the other side of the room or something. I don't get out much. If building new skills in a way that doesn't stress you out or fill you with dread sounds intriguing, you should give Brilliant a try. If you use the link in our description or go to brilliant.org/TaleFoundry, you'll get a 30-day free trial. And if you decide you love it and want to keep learning, that same link will snag you 20% off a yearly subscription. Teaching yourself new skills doesn't have to be this stressful, overwhelming thing. It can actually be the complete opposite. Give Brilliant a try today and see how cozy learning can really be. Anyway, that's all for this one. Thanks for watching and keep making stuff up. I'll see you next week. Bye!